Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors. Leaders that you might have never heard of, but in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, decisions they made, and the lessons that they learned along the way.
Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast.
James, welcome to What Makes You Tick. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Toby. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And Rich, welcome to your own show.
To my own show, our show,
Indeed.
all of our show. No, it's an absolute pleasure. We've got someone that I really like, which is James. We've had a couple of brilliant conversations, and what I love about James is not only has he got an incredible amount of insight from a whole career of being a very successful intrapreneur, but he's also had his entrepreneur journey too. And every time we speak, there's just wonderful insights about what's going on in the market, lived experience, and contrarian perspective. So I think that there's going to be a lot of value for our listeners today from learning from James.
I like the idea of contrarian views. I'll put that on the CV.
You have it.
So, James, what is it that makes you tick?
So what gets me out of bed in the morning is building and seeing change happen. I like the physicality of renovation in houses. I love seeing a business that grows, and it does so through the people by finding the answers and just finding different ways to achieve the goals. And sometimes they're quick fire, other times they take a long time. So that's really what gets me going.
Do you think we're losing our physicality?
I think that I realized myself how far away. A friend of mine said that his son is taking up carpentry, and my reaction said it all. I was absolutely like, wow. And I realized that's the wrong sort of response, because it wasn't a negative response, but it was the first time I've heard someone actually doing something that wasn't connected to either, being in business, running business, supporting business, or anything. And it possibly says something about my myopic world, but also that we don't talk about vocational work at all. It's very much outside of a lot of our worlds.
It's not technology, it's not AI, it's not like white collar. It's, in some ways, it feels quite old school, but I think that there is something about being able to be physical and being able to work something with your hands. So I come from a data background, right? And the most that I've made is code, right? That's what I've created, is code that does something in a virtual world. But there is something about that physicality of, I have created this thing and I can see it and I can touch it and I can feel it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's something which I probably like sport for, because it's the freedom of physical expression. It's not about necessarily winning. If the goal is obviously to do the best, if the outcome's winning, that's awesome. If the outcome was we got beaten by a better side, which is very much sort of rugby ethos, then I think that that's really great, because you can respect the fact that someone else on that occasion was stronger, was better, and they got the better result. And so it's a bigger piece, isn't it, around you take away learning, therefore it's good. If you don't take away learning, it's a pretty poor day out.
Where did that mindset and that framing come from for you?
That was definitely from rugby. There was a poem, "The Man in the Mirror," which was used by the England rugby team when we hosted the World Cup. We performed really badly, but the ethos was really strong around the idea that you go out onto the field, look yourself in the mirror, and you say, "Look, I'm going to give it my all, and we won't necessarily win, but if I come back and I've given it my all, it's literally all I can do." And I think that that's a really good way for business, for people. It's a good way to try to coach people into change, that they won't succeed the first time. So, the idea of failure is great. Fail fast, iterate quickly, have that as part of learning. And I think that if people have got that as a defense, as a strength, it helps them it's a strong defense against feeling bad about when things don't always go well. And so it might be that you spent a week doing something and you just can't get it to work. You can't find the right way. You've written campaigns, whatever it is, the code isn't working. But it's when you then keep coming back, and that resilience, and when you do achieve it, then you haven't just solved the problem, you've solved how to approach problems. And that's the piece that I think is so fascinating in business, in scale up businesses, because every day is a learning day. And so I like surrounding my people who can't necessarily succeed all the time. They're not geniuses, but they've got the resilience and they've got the attitude to just try. And they always nail it, maybe fifth time, sixth time, whatever, but it's always success, but it might take time. And so I like that sort of resilience in people.
I'm really curious to ask something here, which is I was having a conversation with my brother-in-law the other day on a walk, and it was about sportsmanship versus gamesmanship. And I was thinking about how, like, why a lot of great people in business have come from sporting backgrounds and engineering and scientific backgrounds is because it is this kind of like, we know that the practice and testing is what gets us to our high standard. But in business, it's this short-term thinking. And there's so many factors that affect why someone would have a short-term thinking in business, but it promotes gamesmanship, which is we'll win at all costs to beat our competition because all that matters is the result today. And it's not about that example that you've mentioned from rugby. And it's rugby's very famous sport for that, which is like, it is the best team wins on the day. And you always look back and introspect, but just like fundamental to sport is we practice, we control the factors that we can control in our training, and then on the pitch the score will take care of itself.
Yeah.
I just wonder your view on that.
I think the gamesmanship is when you aren't you're finding the extra nudge. You're finding an extra way beyond the fact that they might be better than you. So you're trying to seek something additional. And I think it's very natural, but I think it goes further in ways that might not be so pleasant. And I've spoken to coaches who coach rugby and football at school at kids level, and they'll say that the same kids will act differently when they're playing the different games. And it typically comes down to that gamesmanship, because they're a very strong sporting kid, will have a certain different attitude and therefore trying to seek the sympathy of the ref, trying to claim that, was it, who knocked this out, whatever. And you see it occasionally, but cricket, there've been several instances where someone they know that they've hit the ball, it's been caught, but they'll wait until the ref has told them yes. But you'll see others where it's celebrated that they just say, I caught it, I nicked it. So I think that there is that element of professionalism where you want to be seen as being the best at your sport, and you don't want it to be because you did something that could undermine people's view that you were so good. It's almost detracts from the strength of the individual. But there are occasions when you might need to win the game, and so you might try to seek advantage. But I think if it's the way you have to win, I think that's wrong. On occasions, of course, everyone's going to see if they can do something just to get the advantage.
Yeah, everyone's excited. I don't know when this is going to come out, but no, it's going to come out really quickly, so maybe before the final race of the F1 season. But I think everyone expects Max Verstappen to use gamesmanship to win this championship. Okay, I'm curious where this all came from then, James. So you were talking a bit about principles and character. Like what are some of your earliest memories around where this kind of principles and character was forming within you?
I think from a young age, I really appreciated independence. So at the age of 12 and 13, I was cycling around England in a sort of roughly pre-mapped, way. My parents knew where I was going, but it was social services would have had a field day. And I think there was always that sense of go and do something for yourself, self journey, self learning. And I then spent a number of years traveling around Asia. And I think I like that idea of you're in it for yourself, but you're going to get out what you put in. And so I think if people want or have the expectation that others are there to make it happen for you, that's quite far away from how I was brought up or what I believed in personally. So perhaps I was always seeking goals and seeking fulfillment myself without the need for other people. So yeah, not fiercely independent because I really like people, but fiercely unexpecting others to be part of my success. And I guess I have taken that through now, and I hugely value integrity and accountability, and just give it a go. I think those are fantastic traits, and maybe they've come up over the years. And some bad things happen. I got my back broken at rugby, so I couldn't play, and then I ended up coaching kids because I still wanted to be connected. So you kind of your journey might not be in the direction that you expect it to be, but you still find a way to fulfill in some way. Or you don't and you just give up and you say life sucks and others are to blame but life is full of things that are unexpected. So
Hmm. How do you balance that kind of, having to be out for yourself in a way, that extreme responsibility and accountability with playing well with others and also recognizing that to really be successful, whether it's, in a team sports or in a career, because even individual sports, you've got your team around you that helps you to be
yeah,
successful. How do you balance those two things of extreme ownership and accountability with doing it for something that's bigger than you and being a good teammate?
that's a really interesting question and observation on what I said before. I'm very independent minded, but I love working with people, and I'm really happy being providing the role of this is the direction we should be going in. Now let me run around and help support you. It's that servants. I've forgotten what it's described that as, but it's that you're serving the servants sort of thing. And
Servant leadership.
yeah, servant leadership. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that because I think that that's how, if you truly expect people to grow, and actually, if you truly expect a business to grow, you have only got, between 40 and 80 hours in a week. You have only got two pair of hands, one brain, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the concept of personal achievement immediately has got to be through others to be successful. So I like independence of let me crack on and build something out, but it's then going to be through people that occurs.
Because I feel like people go to extremes where they don't take that ownership, right? So they don't say, actually, let me do the part that I can do. Let me make sure that I put my hand to the plow. They're looking for other people to do stuff for them, or they're just saying, well, I'm going to do everything and there's no space for other people. And I think that nuance and that balance, even from our conversations, I think that's worked really well for you, of being able to almost do both of those kind of extremes, but in a really balanced way.
I appreciate that. It was quite fun. We did disc profiling when I was at Trustpilot, and I came out as sort of have two characteristics typically, and one of it is sort of 60% dominant, but the 40% was influencer, which is typically that I enjoy working through people rather than independently. And that seems to be a pattern that plays out. So I love being around people. And then I was talking to someone recently and they said, what do you do if you're doing a big presentation to an audience? And I said, I'll typically walk home afterwards and just have some really good me time. And for me, that's the balance of working with people is you giving it all. That's a lot of energy, exuberance, and you're really there. And then for me, I need to just have a little bit of quiet time. Whereas I know other people, they will just smash the pub with their friends and with those people.
I'm curious. Yeah. So you obviously introduced Trustpilot there. Like, what's your story of how you got into tech?
Yeah, Trustpilot was an interesting start because I was working in the feedback arena, and as you do, you get the call, and somebody said we want to grow a business that's doing well in Scandinavia. We just launched in America, and are you interested? And it was close enough proximity-wise to my experience, so I felt I could add some value. I've been working in SaaS for a number of years, and I was quite excited because Danish people sounded quite fun to be around. So initial meetings down in Conduit Street. That's where Trustpilot started. Interviewed a bunch of people, and we literally grew it from day one. And I have a really beautiful memory, which is we rented office space in Holborn, and then we took the initial office space, and I said, I think this could grow, but we'll take it for like 20 people to start with, but can we only pay for 5 people because we're just starting with 5 people? And then we quickly grew, and then it grew from 25 and then 50 and then 50, and we grew to 100. So we were literally taking over the space as we grew. And it was a really nice metaphor for growth for us as a business, because we were literally taking more space in the same area. And at the same time, we used to have an internal metric, which is out of 10 people we call, how many know us? And of course, until the first 8 or 12 months, no one really knew us. And then very quickly that moved into, okay, yeah, more people. And my favorite story was somebody coming back from a marketing event when someone had said, oh, what is it you do? My colleague said, oh, I work at Trustpilot. And the response was, oh, who's Trustpilot? And someone else butted in and say, you're in marketing and you don't know about Trustpilot. Where the hell have you been? And it's one of those nice casual comments that just makes you think, yeah, we've achieved some sort of brand here.
I love how you were there from the very start, but also how quickly we skipped over the story. And I think that there must be some amazing lessons there. What I'm curious to understand is, I love people who are excited by the challenge and opportunity to be quite pioneering.
Yeah.
And to turn an idea into a thing, and then to rally a team and assemble a team around a vision. And I just wonder what it was for you about those early days, about that opportunity and that challenge that made it such an exciting opportunity, not just for you, but for the early people that joined that mission.
Yeah, I'm not sure how or why we became so focused on the energy in the office, but I think it's because we were running monthly cycles, and we realized 4 weeks, you're separating those out strategically or tactically into what needs to be achieved within that week versus the following week, in terms of, first and second week of the month would be laying up the deals, or the last week and the first week would be laying up deals. The second week would be then closing them. The third week mopping up, and then fourth week, instead of that being the typical closing week, the fourth week you should be on your next month, so that it doesn't become feeding hand to mouth. And there was just an overall buzz. We were quite a big machine. By the end of it, we were doing £1 million months in the outbound, with a strong demand gen backing up. So it wasn't just sales; it's very integrated, aligned marketing and sales. But there was a definite focus on nothing machismo in the slightest, but just a team strong attitude. We used to talk about building the rocket, and everyone who came in, they either bought into it or they left pretty much by their own choice, because it certainly wasn't for everyone. It was that sense of energy probably helped us to just battle down and bulldoze our way through to becoming the biggest in the UK. We were respectful of alternative companies, FIFA and Revu. I knew their founders, I knew the CEOs, and we would talk regularly just to make sure that we were keeping the market clean. And that was really important as we grew a space, was to make sure the Competitive Markets Authority was looking at us, and we all agreed we didn't need to have a dirty marketplace. Really important that we weren't trying to just throw shit at each other. To the point where with one of them, if we were hiring and the other had been at one of our companies, we would just phone each other up and say, okay, is this person good or not? So we didn't mind that people moved. That's absolutely fine. But what we didn't want was someone who was really bad going to another company and just being bad for them, which might seem odd, but it was this idea about building the shed around was really important. That was a positive place in the market.
That reminds me, Tolu, of what Gallagher said, which is, Aligned are really focused on building the category. And it's the same thing, right? The strength of the category, a rising tide lifts all boats. But I don't think many businesses think that way. They certainly don't behave that way. And it is like stealing each other's staff and stealing each other's company, customers, and attack plans and all that sort of stuff. And, spreading false information. which I think is going to become more and more prevalent in the market, is because people just go, well, there's a big opportunity for us here to kind of like leverage technology to kind of chop down the other trees in the jungle so we have a chance to rise. And I just don't see that in the AI startups popping up all over the place, that there is this kind of an overall movement towards trying to make this category high trust. And the promise of a lot of these AI startups, in my view, is growth. If it's
Yeah.
rocket ships was in SaaS, now it's about like, unbelievable speed of growth. We need to try and become 100 million ARR company this year, and there's just like this, it's a very different type of vibe and a focus that I see within the market. I just wonder your observation in terms of how you're seeing companies operate today versus maybe some of those core values that contributed to you and other companies actually becoming now household brands from people not even recognizing who you were when you first started Outbound.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't know if it's moved on or not. I don't know. I still see companies who wants to create a brand of the business which has integrity, which has that view of um, being more or being as focused on the way it does business for its people. So the people are proud of it. I still see that, particularly with the younger generation, it really matters to them. So I think that possibly is of it possibly subtly different because of the generational differences, and we know that the younger generation have got a much stronger duty of care, possibly towards themselves as well. I don't know how that translates into category definition and building and etc. The only other thing I'd probably think about is that we were a little bit nervous of creating a bad category, and we knew that enterprises weren't interested at that time in us having conversations, because I remember talking to HSBC and a number of others, and they said, so you want us basically to enable people to give reviews on us. We won't control it, and it'll just go straight to the public domain, and we can respond to it. Okay. And you think this will work, do you? So that was a great experiment with some really great guys on the floor, where we said, look, we're just going to try to hit enterprise. I don't know if it's going to work, because my sense is there was too much nervousness. Whereas now we look back and now everyone's doing reviews and it's nothing. But at the time there was a sensitivity. So I think because we were in that sensitivity, we were possibly also sensitive about the whole category. So perhaps people where their environment means that they have got to have some sensitivity, they bleed us a bit more. But you're right. I think a lot of organizations are just so damn focused on growth. And I think it's going to get worse in one way, because I think what we haven't started to see is we'll call it gamesmanship of the LLMs. Half the demand gen budget going into training the LLM. And what's going to stop people from setting up indirect channels where they start to then raise questions about competition? I mean, in a sales meeting, the only thing I would ever let someone do in terms of critique in the competition would be if someone says we're thinking of going with X, you can go, oh, okay, that's an interesting idea. And you just sow seeds of doubt. I'm not sure that LLMs are about sowing seeds of doubt. It's about, literally laying out stuff that's probably falsehoods. So I think there's going to be a loss of that. I can't see how that will pan out. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Have you spoken to people, come across that side yet?
So it's interesting. We're starting to work with this brilliant company, seed stage company in London, who are doing disinformation technology. And this is really big in government. So, it's been happening in government for years, and I won't name specific countries, but some countries hire people specifically to create disinformation to affect war and to, direct troops into different places. And it's starting to affect corporations now. This hackers specifically targeting businesses to disrupt, and it's shutting down like lithium mines in Panama, costing a couple of million a day. So it's like really big risk factor. So that I think it's just one of the incredible ways that people using leveraged technology like AI can literally take our companies. And if you're not protected against it, then you're in real trouble. And it's the whole ethics piece. You know, a lot of people that I know are studying ethics in AI, but I don't think that most people are. And the promise of AI is that most people with an idea can very quickly leverage something that's quite significant. And if someone is not thinking about that, either in terms of the opportunity, but also the risk that's coming with this whole new way that people will find out about information and get a view on it and be driven to take some kind of action.
Yeah.
It's just this thing that I think a lot of people are not considering. And I think there'll be some very, very famous cases of businesses being massively impacted, potentially closing down as a result of not being aware of how unethical some people will be towards their business and their customers and their category.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, everyone's briefly, journalists in the past, and it's no difference, but the impact is so much more significant. And particularly because if you brief a journalist or you give a briefing to anybody, it's one of the opinions that's out there. Whereas if you're briefing Gemini or Claude or Chat or whatever, and that becomes quite pertinent to someone's buying process, that's more than just briefing a journo. That's lodging quite a significant block competitors' selling capacity. Yeah, as you say, it'll be interesting to see the infringements or the lawsuits that follow downstream on that.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I'm curious as well. So in the early team, so if we think about that Trustpilot early team, I know you said that, you know, if people liked it, then they stayed and grew. If people didn't, they would probably opt out themselves. What were some of the characteristics that you determined made someone great in that environment and flourish versus the ones who self-rejected?
Yeah, I think there were two types. It was somebody who didn't. So we had stand up. I bought 100 desks from Denmark, got them shipped over, the raise up desks, and so we would have, every day there'd be times where I'd be right, desks up, and that was for everyone. That was for the people in HR, the hirers, trainers, salespeople, marketing, everyone. And so you had to just enjoy that slightly daft nature. We had using wireless headsets, and so you'd have people just lobbing a rugby ball back and forth. There were a couple of hoverboards in the office, and Tony, who was running the sales team directly, he would be practicing his putting whilst coaching somebody on the headset. So it was hugely professional, but at the same time, it was just enabling people to enjoy the atmosphere of self existence rather than being pushed into some sort of battery head approach. And we found it hugely successful because it just stimulated people. And off the back of that, people were going on holidays together, they were sharing accommodation, and it just created a community sort of by mistake. I mean, yeah, we didn't plan for it to happen. We certainly enabled it and focused that it was a better place to work in if people were having their own personality that they could relate. I got a guy who used to work for me. I got him to do some tagging on a couple of the walls because I didn't want us to be Danish, a copy of the Danish office. So a lot of the furniture was lime green and orange, and so we had these graffitied walls. And the idea was, this is London, this is our own approach. And the Danes loved it. They thought it was a hoot. They did not so much understand the idea that the first deal by a salesperson, uh, you would be given totally full of choice, but a shot with chili in it. Everyone took it. Some folks may not have wanted to, but they all did it. And that's one of those things where you think, was that bullying or was that just a culture which people wanted to be in? And I'll never know the answer because I never asked every person, but I never heard anyone complain and everyone would be rallying for the next person. And I think some of those are very fine lines, but with that whole energy. So going back to your question, what were we looking for? We were looking for people who had that degree of Engagements, they really wanted to sell. They really wanted to do their job, or if they're training, or if they were in the recruiting team, passion, probably passion. What we struggled probably more with were people who were more isolated and out for themselves. And the reason that wouldn't work was we were really strong on your behavior towards others was really important. Not just being the good guy, but actually supporting and helping them try to support others. Really important. So, yeah, I think those are the sorts of characteristics there. But then the teams themselves, they started to adopt when they were looking, and where we have the seniors would be hiring and helping in the hiring process. They continued that. So I suppose we believed then that it was the correct approach, because the senior sales guys, the AEs, were as bought in as the managers as we were to this ethos. I think it sort of became, it took on its own capacity after a while.
Yeah, I like that. So the definition of culture is the set of values and behaviors of a community of people. And it has to come from the people, right? I think that we've spoken
Exactly.
about this before, but if you try and dictate the culture to people, they'll
Uh,
always reject it.
yeah,
But if you hire the right people based on the right attitudes and behaviors and some kind of alignment with this is how we operate and this is our principles, the culture will form. And every person you bring into the business will affect the culture. And like
yeah.
you made this very specific, decision to make sure we're trying to avoid bringing negative influences into the culture because we know how disastrous that can be.
Yeah, and it can come down to some simple comments as well that people then really buy into, which is something I was past. This was came from somebody else in a former life, but front stabbing's fine, but don't do backstabbing. I I'm no good with politics and surprises, and if someone's got a challenge, that's fine. Talk to the person who is challenging you in the appropriate way. That might be a manager, but it could be a co-colleague, it could be anybody. And just talk in the appropriate way and learn how to give and take feedback. That's so much easier talking to 5 other people about it, because someone then got to clear up that mess. So I love the idea of front stabbing because it just gets stuff out of you, and we can learn so much quicker, so much quicker. The chances are, someone says, "Look, James, if you do that again, it's gonna really, hassle some people. Hey, what did I say? This. Oh, thank you very much." I'm immediately not gonna be doing something that would have been negative. So I just said, speed, feedback, honesty. Just get it out there. Life is too short, way too short.
So James, you were at Trustpilot probably just before COVID. What are some of the differences that you're seeing now in how, teams are being built, teams are being formed, that culture is being shaped in this new world that we work in with, remote working, AI on the rise? What are some of the changes that you're seeing? And if you were doing it again, how would you do that now?
Yeah, I think change is that, yeah, classically it's opportunity and threat, isn't it? And I think that the balance of life when somebody can choose to work from home and achieve some outside of work goals during that are important to them or their family, their partners or children, whatever. I think that's so powerful. And it's freeing up something that over the years has just become the norm, that you have no flexibility over your life. You work, you'll do, and what we say when we say you'll work out how to do it because we've hired you for your skill. But apart from that, it's 9 to 5, be in the office. The looking back, it does feel like a slightly forced and less appropriate way to work. This 9 to 5 in the office, but it worked. And so I think the norms we've grown up with are around a satisfactory outcome or a way that we kind of go, well, that's the benchmark. And now, because you can't measure the happiness that people are um, finding by not having to go on the commute, etc., we take that as a benefit. I don't think people, because it's not self-serving, I don't think people are very strong at looking at the negatives. And the negative for me is the personal development, the personal growth from being in and amongst a group of other people going through the same challenges and being able to learn just by osmosis, just by being next to the person who's smashing it. What are they doing? What are those little comments that they're making on the phone? Or how is it that they're looking at that data, and how have they managed to just understand the insight that I missed, etc. So much of learning is by just the unexpected. And I think because we are very firmly focused on our own SaaS, our own needs now, we are ignoring the negatives. I think quite strongly ignoring them. And I don't see that companies are able to, or really making a focus on, how do you reshape that gap? How do you bring that gap in a remote world? And particularly if it's remote first, where coming into the office feels as if it's almost a courtesy to the company rather than something that might help the individual.
Do you think that some of it is that it worked because you worked it, if that makes sense? So like, there are people who were in the office all day, every day, but not really learning anything because, for example, their leaders weren't conscious about creating that environment, right? So I think I agree that there's 100% something about learning by osmosis, but you have to be conscious, if that makes sense. You have to
Yeah.
pay attention and really watch and engage and process. So how much of that is that, it kind of worked for you because you worked it? And actually, if you had to lead a remote team, you would make that work because you worked it, versus how much of it is just that environment just creates that opportunity so it works?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It also makes me realize that there is a very generalized view that I'm thinking of when I say this, because engineers, I know some engineers. I don't pretend to be able to dive inside the head of an engineer, but I don't think that sitting around in a group is necessarily something that they feel the need to do, to spend an hour commuting for the pleasure of sitting with people who are just going to probably annoy them at some point during the day, and stop them from jumping in and doing the coding. So I think that the model wasn't always right for everyone. So I think the idea of the conscientious side of management part, yes, because I'm focused on that human development side, and certainly and particularly older school, where we're all aware that the older school was less around that interaction and much more around crack on and do it. Top down approach. So we celebrate the interactions more as a way of learning. I think we're also much more aware that different people learn in different ways. And so there is a much greater flexibility around how we upskill and expect people to upskill themselves, whether it's through videos, one-to-ones, training forums, however it might be. Do I think I still have a struggle if someone said, could you recreate Trustpilot again now, and the strength of that community and the productivity and just the sense of winning, I think it would be harder now. And I am just trying to think on my feet about, would I be able to make that? I'd have to work really hard. And I don't know how much of that would seem sincere. Not sincere. I don't know how much people would buy into it as much, because I've seen some initiatives that have been run, particularly by founders, where they're trying to G everyone up. It can be really murderous to watch the challenge, and your heart goes out. I watched a founder running a Christmas webinar, and he was giving it his all. He was doing the best, absolute best job he could do, or that someone could do. He was absolutely phenomenal. And it was really obvious half the people didn't buy into it. And I just thought, how do you do this? So I'm not sure the answers are there. I think there is just a culture gap, a culture building gap in remote, but I also think that it'll be increasingly hard because people will not accept that there are strong rationales for going back to the office that might be kind of staring us in our face, which I think in due course will say, actually, here was the gap. But I think because we're living in that change still, people are still saying go back to the office for 2 days or 4 days. I'm personally, I think 3 days is a really good balance, but organizations still tend to go on the 2 days because they're driven largely by the influence of the team. But then it's up to the manager to explain and to create that sense of, here's why we need to do this. So maybe that's the full circle, is you just have to give an explanation and live those values of why this is going to help you on your personal development by being in the office, as in it's for you and it's not for us.
I think in a weird way, like Pandora's box has been opened, right? So I was quite lucky, I guess, where I've always worked 3 days from the office, 2 days from home, right? So when I was early in my career, I got all the FaceTime. I got to see the things that you're talking about. So I'm a firm believer in those things. But I also saw that, look, if I'm at home, I know it's a privilege. So I have to prove that me being at home doesn't drop my productivity, right? So I had a really nice balance. But I think being at home 5 days a week, everyone's like, yeah, but I still did my job and the company didn't fall down. So why are you forcing me back to the office? So I think the box has been opened in terms of people have seen that actually I can be productive. But I think it's the same thing with AI, where it's like, yes, you can be productive, but are you getting all of those other things? Like when you didn't have AI and you had to write notes by hand, you got the learning because you're writing it by hand, right? So you're losing so many of those things that I don't think will be really visible until even 5 or 10 years from now, when if kids are using AI from their homework, they don't critically think, right? They're just getting to an outcome that's right, but they don't really understand why. So I really loved your point about you need to make people understand why it's important. So I was in the office the other day, and just at lunch, we all just naturally had a really good chat about stuff that needed to happen that would have been 3 or 4 meetings, right? I'd have had to book separate meetings with everyone. No one forced me to talk about work at lunch. Like we all wanted to do that. We were all just together having lunch. And those are the moments where actually everyone's like, do you know what? It's really good that I actually came in today. Like, yes, I had to commute, but what I got from that interaction was really, really good. And I think maybe that's what leaders need to focus on, is creating those genuine, natural interactions and moments, that it's not me trying to G you up on a webinar. It's me just making sure that actually I'm bringing people together, whether remotely or in person, whatever it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the idea of going into the office, if you say come into the office for 2 or 3 days and then just treating it as you would have done 5 years ago, I think that, to your point, you're missing the point there, because it's right. People have come in. Let's make sure that coming in actually now has an outcome. It's now something which is going to drive an understanding and a kind of a personal insight of, actually, that's good for me. And I do think that companies have got to think, and they should think, about why the individual should come in. There is a big question, which is, if you can't explain why somebody should be coming in, why would you get them to come in? I mean, why would you get them to do anything? So I think you made a really good point. It's very much down to the manager to then have that creative thinking, to create that bond. I've been in situations where everyone would just try and take lunch at the same time. It's the tiniest little change, but what it meant was suddenly everybody was in the same place eating and talking. And then it didn't matter if people took longer over lunch, because they were just learning and sharing and bonding. And that was so much more valuable than let's get back to work immediately. So it became a nice something that wasn't happening when people were at home.
It makes me think of something. It's a Rory Sutherland.
Yeah.
And he's speaking about HS2 and about how, like, they're trying to solve the wrong problem, which is, can we make, it's a bunch of engineers trying to make a train go faster from one location to another. And he said it would be much better if it was given to a marketing person to fix. And the question was, how can we make it so good
That you don't
and
mind.
so interesting and entertaining to travel from here to here that it would be ridiculous to consider driving?
Yeah.
And I like that. It's like, how can we make the environment at work so great, so entertaining, so challenging, so spontaneous, that it would be ridiculous for them to consider they would not want a part of that. I was thinking the other day, like, I've got a bunch of friends who still work in offices, still work part-time, lots of work remotely. And a lot of companies who are trying to do like Christmas parties now, this time of year, and people just don't go.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of these companies that used to be all full-time in the office that have these roaring cultures, like you mentioned about Trustpilot, but I can think of a lot of companies who like, They have these fond memories of those early stages, who now people just don't even go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies are running the old playbooks and the old way of thinking without the leaders really stepping up and saying, right, our job is to get people to come with us.
Yeah.
Because technology, whilst it makes us faster and more productive, and that's the promise, how is it possible that in a world with AI, we're not more productive than when we work 5 days a week in the office with all the commutes
And
without
people,
that technology?
and people are different now as well. I think there's been a move away from drinking. I know with some friends, we would when we met up, we would go to a favorite pub and just sit down for 4 or 5 hours or whatever. And just gently drink. There was no outcome, no big result we were looking for. No one was going off and clubbing or doing me daft. Just chilling. But what we do now is we'll just go for a walk and hit certain pubs on the way, because we actually just value just getting out and not just sitting in the same 4 walls. And I think if you're doing Christmas parties now, you've got to think outside the box. You've got to do some stuff that's experiential. I remember at Trustpilot, we did a school games day. Yeah, life was getting a bit serious. We're really, really focusing down and stuff. So I said, oh, let's just do a school day. Because I had memories of school days where you have little bean bags on your head and hoops and stuff. And the idea was to just make everyone flat structure. No one cared who anyone was. It wasn't about seniority or anything. We had a load of new people, so it meant that they could become part of it. And the table stakes were, you might be good at hula hoop or whatever it is, as in it's stuff that didn't matter. Can you run backwards quicker than you manage? All this sort of daft shit. And those sorts of things people really bought into because they weren't around booze, or they were slightly more inclusive to everyone. So I think that the whole Christmas party theme maybe doesn't even just touch the needs of some more of the audience who we have in our teams nowadays. So again, it's that inclusivity. Just think more. Just think more, and get others to design it as well. Hand it down. Get everyone else to throw their thoughts in.
Because what's been really coming to me when you've been talking is almost like knowing your personnel, right? So knowing the people you have in your team, because also now my emails all have my name on it, right? Like everything is personalized. I get personalized ads on TV, like everything is personalized to me. And actually I'm one of those people, like Christmas parties just don't really appeal to me. Like I don't drink alcohol. I don't necessarily like being around lots of drunk people that have been drinking and asking me. So like, I would much rather do like a big walk, for example, or go out for a meal or whatever it is than the traditional Christmas party. And I think if you're as a leader in touch with your people, you can create something that's actually a lot more authentic and a lot more inclusive for everybody, where actually people can find the pockets of what they want to do when they want to do it. So when I worked at Sky, they had Skyfest, right? Which was some kind of festival. There was some drinking and stuff like that, but there were also some stuff for family, so they had lots of different pockets for different people because they were actually really good at knowing their personnel and catering for lots of different types of people. So I think in the world we live in now, it's even more important that you can personalize it a little bit to the people you have in your team.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been a sort of a hierarchy of easy stuff to do, and it starts with drink, and then it's sporting, but there are so many other things you can do. You can just get people to go and do pottery or something, or just go to do something where they come out having had a laugh, and they may have learned, or they've just done something different. Those are the things that I just think become more deeper memories because they have gone on a little journey, not journey, but just something daft. I remember some friends organized, I forgot what you call it now, where you basically have a list of things to find and some clues.
Like treasure hunt.
It's treasure hunt all across London.
Yeah.
And you think, will people do it? Oh yeah, once people get in the spirit, they will. And no,
100%.
The determination to beat others over something that's pretty irrelevant, but the buy-in and the experience, such a magic moment.
I think it comes back to that physicality that you were talking about earlier. People, because I think back to my teammates, like the people who I got up at 7 a.m. and sweated with and I worked hard with, there's a different level of bond because you've done that together. And it's the same thing. Like you go traipsing around London on a treasure hunt, there's
Yeah.
it's not the same physicality that we might have been talking about before, but you're moving, you're doing something together, you're building something, you're finding something. Like, humans love the adventure and the hunt, right? And how can you bring that out in people?
Yeah, we talk about the lived experience from a work experience perspective, but I think that perhaps is a large gap now in the cultural piece. And I mentioned it before. How do you create that deeper engagement and that, yeah, to be honest, deeper fun, deeper one-to-one enjoyment, where you're with people who you wouldn't normally be. So you're not hanging out in your tribe. You're hanging out with people who you've been, put with because, hey, you guys are going to run around town all day, and you've had a hoot and you've learned so much stuff about them and stuff about yourself and how you relate and all those things. That can't happen in a fully remote environment. So how do we re-engage? And it's a really interesting challenge for every single company. And it's not a new one. I was speaking to a specialist in remote management yesterday, and he was saying that companies still haven't got their heads around this because it's about how do you help people in need? How do you spot it? How do you, and it's not just, are we using Slack? It's a whole approach. I think we're getting there, but going back to the earlier questions, I think we are struggling to rebuild that sense of commitment and engagement and deep focus on being part of a company. And we're more focused on how do we work inside the company, but I feel it's a little bit more superficial.
Do you think it's also because, and this might be slightly controversial, because companies haven't shown necessarily that commitment to us, right? So, back when I was growing up, you might work at the same company for 25 years, have good benefits, have a good pension. The company showed some kind of commitment and loyalty to you. But more recently, what we're seeing is like mass layoffs, even though companies are profitable, and the company's not really being committed to us. So people are like, well, why would I really fully commit myself to you?
I think it's a really good question. I think there are possibly lots of different variables going on. I'm not sure we have necessarily changed in just a couple of years of the more recent layoffs, because I think there's a deeper, longer term question on it. But I certainly sense that from the millennials forward, the concept of loyalty is a two-way street. And before that, I don't think it was. I think it was the privilege to work for a company. I've got a job. I now have personal safety, satisfaction, and security. Therefore, I will work for the business and give it my all. And I think that there is a higher bar of expectation of what's in it for me. Famous conversation in one of the companies, because I won't be specific here, where somebody said, well, I've been here for 6 months, so where's my promotion? And it was said with an honest kind of, but I'm doing what I should do, so you're going to promote me, right? And it's like, okay. So there is a broad spectrum of understanding and expectation. I think that has broadened. Whereas, as you say, when we were younger, it was much more of a one-way street. You got the job, you did what was expected, and in the way that it was expected. Now, much more two-way street, and the people's expectations are not so easily uh, satisfied or accommodated, because one person's needs satisfied that way, other person's need that way, and there isn't one size fits all. And that's fine, because that's just normal. We're much more accepting now. The whole diversity piece is everything diverse. It's not to do with certain specifics or themes. Everything is diverse, and you have to manage, as I mentioned before about learning, you have to set learning up to accommodate everyone's different ways of learning. You can't just say, this is how we're going to learn. It doesn't work, and it's not appropriate. And I don't like that it's I like that it's in that way. I think the idea of forcing you will work in this way, it doesn't marry with the world around us now. But it can be quite challenging on occasions when you do realize that you have to think, okay, I want to move forwards with this, but what are the different likely challenges we're going to have from different types of people's thoughts? But that's, again, probably what makes this interesting, isn't it? It
Definitely.
keeps us exposed, because I said it before, every day is a learning day, and you're like, wow, I wouldn't have expected to get that kind of pushback. but it's valid pushback. I just hadn't thought about it for something.
No.
Like, for me, that's exciting. For others, I know a lot of others, they look at me when I talk like this and they think I'm absolute bonkers.
I do think that people's expectations of what they're entitled to are very different. And I feel like people are losing that understanding of you have to provide value to get value back, right? So that conversation about, look, I've been here 6 months, it's like, whoop-de-doo. Like, you don't get a pay rise for just being here for 6 months. If it's like, I've been here for 6 months and this is what I've delivered, this is the outcomes that I've given, very different conversation. But I feel like that kind of conversation is only increasing. And for me, a lot of this comes back to leadership, is how are you setting expectations with your team, right? So yes, someone can come in with wild expectations, but my job as a leader is to show them, like, okay, if you want a pay rise, these are the value markers you have to hit. So it's just such an interesting thing, where it should be a two-way thing, right, in some ways, but what's expected of leaders is now very different because people are coming in with different expectations.
Yeah, it does force us to be smarter. It forces us to be better leaders. I will always hire on that blend of attitude, behavior, and results. And if 2 out of 3 are met, but the third one's not met, there won't be a promotion, because you promote and you're then engaging with somebody in a bigger, wider set of responsibilities that will involve being useful to other people. So your behavior and your attitude is just as key as, can you hit whichever target you're setting for yourself, or your sets in the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd say something interesting that blends into this very nicely, and I'd be very curious to hear James's perspective on it. So from a recruitment point of view, right? So I speak to people all the time, as you can imagine, who are a bit unfulfilled with where they are, or they've just been, blindsided and they're suddenly available, or they're strategically thinking, or maybe they're just tempted to look at something else. The two most unattractive things always for businesses to hear is either someone who's so burned by previous experiences that they bring that into the interview. And I think about, like, people who are super traumatized and scarred by previous relationships going dating again. And being like, you wouldn't do this, you wouldn't do this, this happened, this person was terrible. And like that, how off-putting is that? So people that take that approach to opportunity, you are not going to be like, all these terrible experiences that I accept no accountability for and was all their fault is horrible. And then the other side is someone who goes, I'm really happy where I am, but I'm always just interested in looking elsewhere.
Yeah.
In case something better comes along, because then people go, well, you have absolutely no loyalty. And I think people just forget that if you're talking about joining a great business, and the best businesses will always be hiring because they'll always be growing, but either one of those two things, you're either traumatized and scarred, and then you bring that in with these horrible expectations and what a leader's going to be like and what I should get and all that sort of stuff, or I just want to get paid a bit more.
Yeah.
Well, so unattractive. And I wonder what your take is on that.
Well, I think it's always a surprise when you hire somebody, and exactly as you say, you discover in the process of interviewing that they've become interested because you showed interest in them. Well, every company that's worth it. So at Trustpilot, we had a continuous battle with other companies because we were big and successful. We became very, very well known as coaching well, really creating some decent, strong individuals who were constantly being tapped up by recruiters. And it's like, fair game, of course it is. We know that goes with the territory. But what we wouldn't do is talk to somebody who, as you say, was interested in us because we might be able to pay them a couple of more quid. Because we know that 6 months down the line, when we've invested, the first 6 months is a massive overhead. The CAC on that is very bad. The CAC gets better on so metaphorical CAC, obviously, but just that whole acquisition cost, you need it 6 months onwards. It's not the first 6 months. So if someone is just going to come in for 6 months and then swan off, why would we want to do it? So if we heard that would be brilliant to know, because if they didn't have a really strong reason to join us, we didn't want them. And it had to be around their own personal development and what they could bring to us. So we wanted people to tell us what they expected that we could do for them. And I think that now, if you want to build out strong employee relations, it starts, and this whole conversation sort of frames it. We're talking about it's not about what the business says it needs. It's what the employee's seeking, and then is that a good marriage? Because if it's not, then the company thinks it's going to get somebody for a cheaper price than they're worth, or they're just hiring because they want the person. They don't care what the person's about. So they might run into problems with the wrong type of person for the business, the wrong fit, or the wrong expectations. So I think, again, it's about increasingly we have to just start to think, or not start, but we have to think, how do we actually hire from the outside in? Why would somebody want to join us? Not, here's what we've got, this is all about us. But we want people because we want them to tell us what's in it for them. And then we'll figure it if we can make that happen. If we can't make it happen, fair enough, that's fine. But let's know that up front.
Yeah, that's great. It's how I draw the conclusion between recruitment and sales, which I think if you look at most recruitment processes, no salesperson's ever been near designing that. It's like this funnel. We want to fill as much as we can in the top, create competition, do our screening and vetting, 7 stages, maybe you get some feedback. Whereas a good recruitment process will start with trying to find alignment around what the business is trying to achieve in terms of the challenge, and then what the person's trying to achieve in terms of their growth, and then see if we have like a sort of fundamental, here's where we're both trying to go. Look, this kind of makes sense. Again, like going on a date and realizing you kind of want the same things out of life. I think most people seem to skip that. It's like, have you done this and this, which we're looking you to have experience of? Have you worked for our direct competitor? Are you a technical fit? But without really understanding that the reason why you might be getting that person is because either they're being unsuccessful in a very similar environment, which is pretty bad.
It's the intrinsics. And I mean, just flipping it onto the go-to-market, it's the same challenge. People talk about the pain and the gain. The pain gap, you talk to an organization or a founder, and they're very excited because they've identified a gap in what someone's doing and how they can fill it cheaply, quickly, whatever. And that's not the problem. The problem isn't the gap that someone needs to fill. It's what needs to change inside a company in order then to accommodate the new change. So it's exactly as you were talking about the dating and recruiting, it's thinking behind what would end result, what's the end outcome that would be great? Because we can see that you're not there. We can see that there are challenges in what you're doing, and we believe that that could be improved. What would be the things that would have to happen at your side in order for, if we came in and did X, Y, and Z, what would that do to your business? And how much of that is within your grasp or your desire, etc. And that's where sales value selling stops pretty much at, right, ROI calculators are based on, here's what we can achieve for you. It does not include, actually, here's the challenges you're going to have to go through. That's the piece that stops something from happening, as much as, was it too expensive, blah, blah, blah. So I think that piece around looking deeper, and that for that deeper alignment, it goes beyond the employee. It goes into the whole way people work with other organizations. With someone was asking me last week about how do you work with partners? Well, you start by just looking at what is it you do and could we accelerate it? If I look to change your course as a partner, if I try to get you to do something different, hey, you could sell ours as well as yours. If that's not just adding 1 + 1 = 3, then it's 1 + 1 = 1.5, and that's slowing them down. It's really, really simple if it's thought about in a certain way.
I'm curious about this. So we can kind of link it really nicely, which is people all want to join a business that's got product market fit. And then after product market fit, we've got go to market fit. And that's quite a messy process to go from, we've got some product market fit, but now we're really starting to scale that. And that might be the kind of like we've got to 1 million or 3 million. And now we want to go from 3 to 30 and beyond. And you obviously went through that regionally with Trustpilot too. I'm just curious on your take around what are some of the lessons that you've learned around finding go to market fit that would be interesting to share.
Yeah, I think so many companies struggle with the initial focus is how do you take one client, 3 clients, 5, 7, whatever clients, and then find the alignment of what's the commonality that we now believe the addressable market, the sales addressable market, not the total because it never matters, but what's the sales addressable market, and how much do we have to refine the roadmap? Because if you don't refine the roadmap, you're just going to end up building lots of different versions, which you can't afford, and you have customization everywhere, and you need configuration, not customization. So this idea about bringing together a single North Star understanding about these are the pains we solve, these we don't. That's really challenging. And then adding on to that is, as the company does that, it finds that maybe the new companies in its path ahead, they have different needs, or maybe the sector isn't as big as they wanted it to be, or there are competitors who they're running into, because as they refined, they became quite a tight point solution that someone else, particularly in the world of AI now, didn't click their fingers and suddenly overnight they've just overtaken them. So I think that there are a number of those scaling challenges of is the first iteration, and we're not talking about just a minimal viable product, which I think is dead now because AI you can build a strong, capable product. But I just think it's that initial set of clients who you think this is now just scalable. It typically isn't. And then finding the next who are the next clients who fit into this. They're not necessarily going to be the same as the first wave. And so all the learnings aren't linear. You don't say we sold to these and it's great, because the next ones might be a subtly different sector, a different size organization, etc. At Trustpilot, we focused on spray and pray initially because we just needed to build up like an echo chamber of people knowing about Trustpilot. Quite rapidly, it became apparent that the SMBs, who took a long time to sell to, they were falling off the cliff. So we maybe 15% loss each year. So the net retention was about 85%. So we realized we needed to move upstream, move up to the SMEs. Can't work with the enterprise because it's too risky. SMBs, someone else comes in and says, no, don't spend the money with Trustpilot, spend it with us instead. We were losing out. So we focused on quite a tight band. We would have done better to start out that way, but there was no information that would have given us that understanding. And so I think that's one of the challenges of scaling is, as you grow and you then change some of the clients who you're talking with, your prospects, your ICP, etc., what does that then introduce that can then materially affect the product or the go-to-market? And it might be that you enter a different sector and there are different challenges they face behind the scenes, but they still seek the same outcomes from you. So they still like you because of what you do, but because of the nature of the organization, it's going to impact them differently. It might be a regulatory challenge that you haven't faced before, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there are significant differences in then the different go-to-market motions, but also the way that then the product has got to then start relating to a market that might be changing or might be new.
So if you were working with let's say a relatively early stage business, they've got product market fit, they were looking to find go-to-market fit, what would be some fundamental principles that you would be looking at that business problem through to help them to scale?
Yeah, I'd be looking at building out the initial client council. So seeking to build based on what the market is telling you, your addressable market, who you can work with. So build around that. Find exactly why a client has come on board, not what you sold it to them for, but after it's been implemented and 3 months have gone down the line and they're now seeing the value of it, then speaking to the chief, the economic buyers, the champions, etc. But find out exactly what the business is benefiting from. In many situations, it's not what they bought it from exactly. Not necessarily going to be significantly differently, but there might be additional benefits that have come out of it that weren't apparent. So that's the first thing. The second thing is build out the model. Build out who are we going to be talking to now? Where does it scale to? Where does it scale to? Do the homework up front. Do the scaling modeling, and then start to look at where are we going? So we're now at 5 million. We've now got 50 clients. What next? Who would we talk to next? Because moving sectors, I think it happens too soon. It becomes part of territory planning where you're like, okay, we need a new territory. Okay, well, we're out of English-speaking countries. Okay, that's quite a big challenge. Now what do we do? Do we go Cyrillic and double byte, or do we just go to the rest of Europe? And those decisions, I have seldom seen those decisions being made on hindsight, because I've been part of that problem sometimes. But I've seldom seen those decisions being made with the same rigor of the early stage decisions. So I think it's how do you see around the second corner, even though you know that second corner of growth is coming? Because everyone focuses on the first client set and the first client problems, and the go-to-market's all around the first clients. I would say scale it, think beyond, and then you've got your model in place.
I wonder who you see it as having the responsibility. You might say everyone, but if you think about where that line sits between sales and customer success in terms of understanding the impact of customers and keeping a good sense on the language they use to describe the impact and how that's been felt by different people throughout the business, who do you see it as owning that problem, and what are your thoughts on what works best?
I think that's a good question. I think head of products and head of revenue have that joint responsibility to be able to take the company forward in the most efficient way. And so that means getting the right sort of customers with the right pains, that the product which has been built in the right way will be able. So you're creating a strong spearhead by having the right products, talking to the right, addressing the right people's problems. I think that CS are fundamental to supporting that through feedback, through interrogation of the clients, and also product being at the forefront. In my last organization, I had an honorary product chap called Artem, and he was the only person who was in the sales community or in the commercial community. He was on all of our Slacks, unfiltered. He was everywhere by invite, because I wanted him, and he was absolutely brilliant, and his team were as well. They need to be at the forefront. They should be on calls with clients, in pitches. They're also very, very highly valued in pitched situations. So I think that it's that combination of products leaning forwards, CS uncovering what's really happening out there. And then ultimately it's going to come down, depending on the organization, but are we building the right thing? And again, that's the friction between products and engineering. So someone asked me, where should product sit? And I said, it shouldn't sit. I don't think it should sit with under engineering's leadership, but I've encountered a situation recently where that seems to work really well. So I think that's a gray one, but I think product typically sits under the CEO or somewhere separate where, they don't get too swayed by the commercial goals and expectations. They have that sense of independence.
So James, thank you so much. This has been a really, really rich conversation. And just as we close, we have a closing tradition of tick fire questions. Are you ready?
Go for it. Let's do this.
All right. If you started your own podcast tomorrow, who would you pick as your first guest, dead or alive?
I'm going to say Mother Teresa, but there's a reason for it, and it's not a quick fire answer.
Go for it.
I worked with Mother Teresa when I was younger in India, and she battled against everything. I didn't agree with what she was doing because I don't agree with that conversion, but her belligerence, her just determination, she was an incredible woman.
That was a tick fire answer. Great. Well, in terms of AI's impact in the world, what are you most excited about and what are you most cautious about?
I think the caution is the wrong goals being driven for and just the overall impacts where people don't care about humanity, and that can be on any level at all. I think what I'm so excited about is the speed of change for sorting out disease, challenges, problems, etc., and just being able to take away bad decision making when it's needed, I'm thinking for, how do people make better decisions overall? I'm thinking outside of business as well. Business will grow, whether it's got AI or not, it'll grow quicker, it'll grow smarter, whatever. But in the bigger, broader sense, I just think that it's just such an amazing opportunity, and hopefully for good, more than bad.
When you're coaching new leaders, what's one piece of advice you always share?
Try to not listen to what someone's saying. Try to listen for the drivers behind what they're saying, because otherwise we get caught up in superficial triggers that might be irrelevant.
Great. What piece of advice for you has personally made the biggest impact on your thinking?
Oh, the biggest piece of advice. There's not one big piece of advice. I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of different leaders, and they've all imparted some very strong words. I asked Peter at Trustpilot, what were some of the mistakes, and he just says, James, we fuck up every day, and that's okay. And that advice just gave me the freedom to go crazy. Someone else just said, a guy called Tim Hannington, who was a super guy, is a super guy. Shouldn't put him in the past tense. Sorry, Tim. And he's just taught me that when you've got a challenge with a situation, a person, and you need to have a really tough conversation, just remember that after that tough conversation, they're going to walk back onto the floor, and you're going to expect them to be as good as the day they hired you, as you hired them. So be careful how far you go in messaging with somebody, because you still want them to feel great about themselves and to do the role. There's no point in going over the top. That's just gratuitous.
And last question, what's one thought that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I think you have to really, really be authentic with what you are trying to do with the team. I think if you don't like what you do, just move on. I don't mind letting someone go if I think the performance and it's just not working, because we hire good people. If it's not working, move them on, because they will be happier being that good person who you hired somewhere else. And equally, if you're not being a good person, if you're not being a good leader, step aside. The business deserves better growth, and you probably deserve more yourself, and your family and your support, they probably want a better person as well. So I just think life is too short to stay in negative situations. Suck it a bit, but it shouldn't be a way of life.
Hear, hear. If you're not in flow, you got to go.
Very good. Very good. James, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We've absolutely loved this conversation.
Thank you, guys. You're great hosts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you guys for listening, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks so much for joining us for the What Makes You Tick podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Yeah, there's so much value in hearing other people's career stories. And if you're someone focused on growing in your own career, check out our Growth Magnet newsletter on LinkedIn. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And we will see you on the next episode.